Okay, so I want to welcome everyone today to our Lunch and Learn. This Lunch and Learn is being brought to you by a collaboration between Oklahoma Human Services, University of Oklahoma, Ann and Henry Zaro School of Social Work, and the Oklahoma Adoption Competency Network. We appreciate everyone joining during your noon or lunch hour, and we want to get started so we can make sure to respect everyone's time and the great information being discussed today. First, let us go over a few housekeeping things for our time together this afternoon. The first is that we are recording this meeting, and by participating, you are giving your consent to be recorded. The second is that we want to help reduce distractions so we can all focus and participate. We have muted everyone to make it possible for everyone to hear the speakers. We want you to express your thoughts and questions, so please utilize the chat for this purpose. We will monitor the chat and questions will be touched upon during our Q&A time during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. We want to see you, so if you're willing and you can, please turn on your video. If you are unable, that is fine also. To receive information about other post-adoption events, please list your name and email in the chat and we will make sure to add you to our contact list. Number 3 is remember confidentiality. It is vital that we protect confidential information, so we will not share specifics like names, details, or anything else about adoption cases, people, or children. Number 4 is if you are a foster parent attending this training, you will receive 1 hour of training credit towards the 12 hours of in-service training that you need each year. These trainings are not yet available as CEU credits for professionals. However, you may submit this certificate to your agency and request training credit for your agency's policies. Please indicate in the chat if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance and participation. And now I want to hand everything off to Dr. Ward and Dr. Schaefer Morgan, who is today's host.
Hello, good afternoon. We are so pleased to be here with you today. I know it's the week of Christmas and everybody's busy with holiday festivities, maybe or maybe not. So we just appreciate your time today. We're so glad to see you. Today we're going to be covering the basics of self-care. So if we could go ahead and get our slide going. Dr. Morgan, you want to go ahead and share that screen?
Yes, give me just 1 second.
Gotta love technology, right? It's great. Give us just a second here. As she's pulling that up, we're going to be talking about the basics of self-care specifically for foster care and adoptive families. But that doesn't mean you can't apply today's concepts to yourself. And so as she's pulling that up, just so we can kind of get to know who's in the room, if you will open your chat up and just let us know your location. So, where you're at. And maybe your role. So are you an employee of DHS? Are you a foster parent, an adoptive parent? We would really appreciate sharing that information. That would be interesting for us to know as we get started.
Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Adoptive parent. Okay, we've got some adoptive parents in the room. Thank you so much. LCSW school counselor. Wonderful. Good to have you here. Okay, DHS post-adopt services. Awesome, great, a great well-rounded audience we have. So we really appreciate that. Dr. Morgan, can you go to the next slide for me?
Yes, ma'am.
And as she's doing that, Dr. Morgan and I, we are with East Central University's social work program that's located in Ada, Oklahoma. We've done just a range of different things. I've been a social worker since about 2007. And, we just have a heart for helping people. And we just want to thank you. If you're a foster parent, an adoptive parent, and you're in the room with us today, thank you for your service. Thank you for what you do. And if you're a clinician, a practitioner, we appreciate you and all of your hard work. We know everything, your heart and soul goes into this job, and we thank you for that. So today's agenda, Dr. Morgan's going to do a little bit of a poll and some ice breaking with you guys. We're going to talk about self-care. Try to have as much engagement as we can. I know sometimes it's a little tricky when we're on Zoom, but we want to hear from you. We want to get to know you. We want to talk to you. So please don't feel restricted by our online environment. Hopefully you'll feel comfortable in sharing what you can and what's appropriate. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of an assessment just to see where you're at with your self-care. And then we're going to start to just touch on what a self-care plan might look like. The objectives today, we're going to briefly just introduce some of the great work with adoption competence, phenomenal things going on there. Define self-care so you have a living, breathing, working definition of that. We're going to talk about some of the barriers that may get in the way of self-care, complete your self-care assessment, and then like we said earlier, just really start to touch on a self-care plan that you can take with you today.
So we want to start off with a little icebreaker. So if you guys wouldn't mind scanning the first QR code, the one on the top here, I'll give you guys a minute to scan, and then I'm going to switch screens, so bear with me. But this icebreaker is a self-care word cloud. So what I want you to answer is just tell us what word first comes to mind when you think about self-care. And then as everyone's typing in their answers, we will be able to see that in real time, what word you associate with self-care. So I'll give just a couple more seconds to scan the QR code. Okay. So it should take you, there we go. Can everyone see the word cloud screen? No. Okay. 1 second. Now can everyone see the word cloud screen? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, we are showing it. Very cool. Exercise, pride, meditation, mental well-being. Man, you should be teaching this class.
These are some good ones.
Boundaries. I see boundaries in there. That is phenomenal. Like where you already are with your words and thinking of self-care. Very cool. Relaxed, peacemaker.
Awesome. Well, that gives
hard. Oh, we have to acknowledge the hard word, Dr. Morgan. That's an important one to acknowledge, I think. It can be hard. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this kind of gives us a good picture of sort of where everyone is at with self-care and kind of what they associate with that. Now, the next thing I want you guys to do, I'm going to switch modes again, so bear with me. Okay, so now if y'all could scan the second QR code down here on the bottom. This is going to take us to a self-care poll. And if you would please just enter what you think your current level of self-care is. It can be low, moderate, or high.
And this really helps us to get a baseline before we even take the assessment of where you think you're at. And then when we take the formalized assessment, you can kind of just independently compare your results. And I think that's always eye-opening.
Okay, now I'm going to switch over and we'll see the live results of this poll. Maybe. There we go. So a lot of you think you're in the moderate level of self-care. That's good. Has everyone had a chance to enter in their answers? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and switch back again.
And please don't feel bad if you have if you are on that lower end, like great self-awareness that you're right there and you know that maybe this is an area you need to improve upon. That's absolutely okay. And so it's good to have that self-awareness of where you think you are right now.
Okay, yes, I appreciate you guys sharing that. That gives us a good baseline.
A little bit about adoption competence. And first of all, let me just say shout out to Oklahoma, Dr. Goodwood, OKDHS, what you guys are doing to bring services to families that really are past that post-adoption or into that post-adoption period that maybe traditionally wouldn't get the resources and support that they need. So thank you for all of your work in this area. And just to kind of summarize some of the things that we have learned through, being part of this process here. So, first of all, what is adoption competency? Really thinking about being able to view events regarding adoption through a very knowledgeable lens. So increasing your knowledge base, increasing your understanding, and then also just really understanding the unique circumstances and consequences of things that are involved or encompassed in the adoption process. So when you think about adoption competence for professionals, this is really going to be focused on helping you to identify appropriate interventions for families in crisis. That's so very important. And I just, as we were going through this material, I was reflecting on my own time when I was an intern in adoption in my undergraduate degree. And wow, we weren't trained on these things. We didn't know, what appropriate interventions might be helpful for families in crisis. So as a professional, to see that we're now focusing on these areas, it's encouraging. The other thing is, we don't want to do harm. What's the thing? When we become a professional social worker, LCSW, whatever it is, we go into those helping professions not wanting to do unintentional harm. So that's a really important point of focus for professionals. And then lastly, for our families, we want families to also have adoption competence. And this is really going to be able to help you to identify your specific needs, help you really get connected to supports and resources. And then kind of where Dr. Morgan and I are linked in is, helping to maybe help you practice appropriate self-care so that you don't feel so stressed and that you can have supports in place that you need to really protect yourself.
So what is self-care? Well, simply put, self-care is a set of behaviors that help promote health and well-being for yourself. A common self-care misconception that we hear a lot is that it has to be physical. So a lot of times when we're talking to someone about self-care, they're like, oh yeah, exercising. And that is a great self-care technique, but there are actually lots of others. And there's 5 domains of self-care that we're going to get into here in just a little bit. In self-care, it's an intentional process or action to enhance your functioning and overall well-being. And it's important to remember that this can vary significantly between individuals for all sorts of reasons. Some of those reasons may be cultural background and differences, your values, your age, physical or emotional needs, and also just personal preference, what you like to do. Maybe I don't enjoy exercising, and that is not self-care to me, that's stressful. So it's really just going to depend on the person. And for example, cultural background, we have people who may enjoy going to church, praying, reading the Bible, or we may have other people, for example, a lot of the Native Americans in their culture, they practice different ceremonies like sweat lodge ceremonies or stomp dances, jingle dress dances, other kinds of cultural ceremonies like that. So it's really going to vary, and culture plays a big part in self-care for a lot of people. And research also shows us that individuals who engage in regular self-care experience better health and well-being compared to those who do not. And this suggests that being proactive and engaging in activities is an important preventative measure for stress and burnout. So we want to make sure that we're practicing self-care before we get to that burnout phase. So really creating a plan and being proactive in that is going to be really, really helpful for us. And one other thing I want to mention, self-care is not just individual, but it can also involve the community. So for example, community often determines what access we have to self-care, implementation of, or even success of our self-care activities. So that's going to be important to remember also.
That's great information, Dr. Morgan. When we look at, as social workers, we do a lot of work with social determinants. And I just love the overlap that when you look at self-care and the domains of self-care, I think it's so important, just like Dr. Morgan said, to not just think about it as being an individual practice, but also community. And that's part of building that social support system and having just strong social determinants so that you have a greater increased quality of life and overall well-being. So when it comes to data and stats specifically focused on adoption and self-care and adoptive parents and self-care, there is a huge gap. wow, we did a lot. We basically did a little bit of a literature review, and we were just very disheartened at the lack of knowledge that we have regarding self-care in adoptive families. And really even, past that point where some sort of child welfare entity is involved. But we found a little bit of information that we thought might be intriguing to bring up here. There was a 2019 study, pretty small sample size of about 229 adoptive parents, and they looked at self-care practices and really got in there to evaluate, where are adoptive families at or parents at regarding self-care. And what they determined through this study was only about a moderate to modest amount of self-care practices were going in with that particular sample size and that particular population. So it was kind of right in that middle of the road range. And I also thought about this, sometimes overall we have a tendency to like maybe overrate things. So that's really important to consider here, the accuracy of this information. And is it really maybe even a little bit lower than moderate to modest? So that would be something to consider. The other thing regarding, data in this is that we do know that stress equals disruption. And we do know that there's a link with stress and lack of self-care. And so, I think it would just be important to note that, and this is pretty old data from the Information Gateway, but it said about 2012, 10 to 25% disruption rate in adoption. So that's not great. And so, how can we support, how can we reduce stress? Is that self-care? We think that that's a huge piece of it. And then just a side note of saying, this is an opportunity to really, we've got some of the greatest researchers around in Oklahoma. And so just to really kind of wave a flag and say, hey, this is an area we need to investigate further so that we can bring knowledge and evidence to our families that need this information and to our practitioners that are serving these families.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. So what are some of the challenges faced in foster care adoption and post-adoption? What research shows us is that there's lots of feelings of isolation with this population in particular. Also a lack of post-adoption support, specifically after 6 months. There's a high level of parental stress. Also a lack of support from family and friends. People don't necessarily understand the challenges that come with foster care and adoption. And then there also may be disagreements among partners and spouses. And a few others that we run into in working with foster and adoptive families include things like navigating the legal system. Especially here in Oklahoma, we have the state legal system. We also have the tribal legal system, and there can be some differences between that. We also have insufficient information possibly about the child placed in the home, tensions and anxiety about meeting the child, and also just navigating the trauma of the child in general. Are there any others, if you feel comfortable sharing, are there any others that you have run into personally, or maybe know of someone that have run into any different challenges?
So maybe if you know a challenge or a barrier, just drop it in the chat so we can see it. That would be cool.
And then Dr. Ward, would you mind monitoring the chat there? I'm not sure if
Sure.
actually
I don't see any additions there in the chat, but it's absolutely fine. We can go ahead and go on to the next when you're ready.
Perfect.
So let's get into the 5 domains of self-care. There are a few different models and domain systems to kind of look at self-care. And I just see that someone did drop something in the chat. It says lack of support for difficult behavioral problems like reactive attachment disorder. And oh my goodness, here's some more coming in. Maybe there was just a little delay. Perception of adoption as being like the end story, the happy ending. Oh wow, guys, these are so good and so, it's so heavy, right? Like, how do you support families who have a kiddo who has some challenges with behavior? That's a really important thing, and it really provides it's a barrier to being able to do what you need to do when you're having all those caretaking roles. So those are very helpful to highlight. Thank you for sharing those. Thank you for that. Absolutely. So the 5 domains of self-care, there's some other models that maybe have broken this down into 7 domains or a little bit less than 5, but we like the 5 domain. So when you look at these, I would challenge you to consider yourself as a whole person, right? You know, mind, body, soul, everything that makes you up as an individual, the things that are unique and maybe the similarities you have with others. So really considering like a holistic approach to this and starting with, you know, our physical body. And maybe that this is what we're putting into our bodies. You know, are we eating well? Nutritional considerations, exercise, and even thinking about, you know, what is your outlet? How do you cope with stress? You know, I still see clients in clinical settings, and we talk about this all the time. You know, like what are you putting in? What are you getting out? And then, you know, really like sublimation. What's your outlet? Is it like a physical outlet? Is it emotional? So really considering that as far as the physical domain is concerned. And then moving on to the spiritual domain, and Dr. Morgan did a great job of mentioning this early. You know, it can look different for everyone. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like church or linked into like religion. It can most certainly be spirituality, your connectedness with the world, with the earth. You know, maybe you are meditating, maybe you're taking some sort of walk where you're really grounded in nature and you're being able to really like reconnect. For me, that's a really great one and really important. Maybe you're attending a service or some sort of group, you know, that's also in that spiritual category or domain. And then social, we know that this one is really, really important. We have all types of new data and literature related to what we just mentioned, social determinants, and knowing that, you know, social isolation, especially after COVID, people are still kind of trying to reintegrate into the world and, you know, navigate new things and challenges after being really socially isolated. So this can be, you know, focusing on relationships, having a close friend you can talk to, you know, scheduling a date night, going to some sort of community event. And, you know, social interaction, I know there's like a whole lot of like talks about social media and get off your phones and, you know, all of those things. But it can even be just like that support from one friend to another, where you're sending a text, checking in, right? And having kind of that back and forth dialogue. Moving into the emotional or psychological domain, you know, this is you being able to regulate in some way. You know, maybe it's reading, maybe it's, you know, doing some mindfulness practices, maybe it's being able to set some boundaries. And then intellectual, this is really about you know, cognition, being able to stimulate your brain in some way. So maybe you're doing puzzles, maybe you're trying something new, reading something, learning a new language, learning a new sport or activity. And, you know, what I want to mention also about the domains is they do intersect and they do overlap. You know, so when you think about doing something spiritual, reading scripture, you know, you're also stimulating your brain because you are reading. And so essentially you're hitting two domains and possibly even three when you think about emotional or psychological all in one activity. So they can't intersect and they can't overlap. So I'm just curious, are there any other domains that anyone else has heard of or that you want to just like maybe drop in the chat and share, or something that, you know, you'd like to add as far as the domains go? Put out the chat. Okay, I don't see, oh, creative, I love that. That's great. Creative is most certainly part of, you know, I think you could put it in a couple of areas. Even like that intellectual side of things where you're able to maybe paint or do something creative. Great, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. That's important to remember. Dr. Morgan, you want to go to the next slide?
Yes.
Oh,
So
and then we have one other comment. This is really good. I think if it's an emotional or spiritual or physical, yeah, that's really good. If you can see the chat there, that's really important. Attending counseling for yourself. Oh my goodness, I'm such a huge advocate of, you know, if you don't see a counselor, a therapist on a regular basis, or just have never seen one, you know, like, please, I think it's important. It helps you connect with yourself, helps you to process. So if you haven't done that, that's a great point. Connect, absolutely. Connect with the therapist. Go ahead, Dr. Morgan.
awesome. Thank you all for sharing. So like we've been talking about, self-care is much more than just taking a warm bath. And again, the common misconception is that it has to be physical, but that's not true. As Dr. Ward said, there's 5 different domains of self-care. And so some of the other ideas that you can use for self-care may include things like setting limits or putting boundaries in place, delegating tasks when possible, challenging the negative thinking and the negative thoughts. And Dr. Ward highlighted how social media can be positive in helping you connect with a friend, but it's also important to sometimes unplug from the email and unplug from the social media and just kind of give yourself a reset and a break. And talking to a friend, meeting up with a friend is another great idea. And then another big part of self-care is something called self-compassion. And this is pretty much just accepting yourself even when you don't meet your own goals or expectations, because sometimes life happens and things just don't go as planned, and that's okay. And we have to be able to just accept that and be gentle with ourselves and move on. And this is really key to having optimal well-being. Some barriers to self-care may include people having multiple roles and multiple things they have to take care of, children's commitments, sports, all of those activities, employment demands. Maybe you have financial constraints or guilt. A lot of people I hear talk about having guilt for taking time out for themselves or putting themselves before others. But that's okay, and it's necessary to do because we have to keep ourselves healthy in order to take care of others. And another thing may be lack of resources. Maybe you don't have someone to watch the kids so you can get away, or like the financial constraints or other resources. If you live in a rural area, maybe there aren't any kinds of resources close to you, and so that can be another barrier. Are there any other barriers that you all want to share in the chat that maybe you've experienced? Dr. Ward, do we have anything yet?
I don't see any, but sometimes I think it's taken just a second to populate, but I don't see anything. If you want to go ahead and move on, and I can flag it if someone responds.
Sounds good. Well, why is self-care important for foster and adoptive families? Well, we know that the stress of having trauma in your home can take a toll. And we also know that self-care may lead to improved physical health, and it can alleviate vicarious trauma. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, vicarious trauma is people who experience trauma by having a relationship with people who have experienced trauma. So for example, some of the kiddos that you may be taking care of have gone through significant amounts of trauma, and you as the caretaker being exposed to that through them can create a trauma response within yourself. And so self-care can help alleviate that vicarious trauma. Self-care also has the potential to lessen feelings of stress. And this is important given the fact that foster and adoptive families may experience high levels of stress. Intentional self-care is an important and appropriate response to this.
Dr. Morgan, we have a couple of chats that I think for the barriers slide that I just want to bring up because they are so good. Barriers, one individual said low self-esteem, that would certainly be a barrier. Having special needs children, that was also in the chat. And then another participant says no members that are close by. So that goes back to that lack of support system and maybe feeling like you don't have the support to take a break. Yeah, so those are very valid, and thank you for sharing those because it just really helps us to understand what barriers are out there. So thanks for your courage and sharing. We'd like to do a little bit of an exercise with you guys that's rooted in the practice of self-compassion. So if you could please just pull out a piece of paper or even just like free text type on your computers, that would be lovely. And if you feel comfortable, we would really maybe like to do just a little bit of sharing, of course, honoring confidentiality and all of the great things that we were reminded about this morning. So let's just kind of practice some self-compassion. So just, we've got our papers out, we've got whatever we need, and just take a moment. And I want you to help me answer the following questions. So, you have a friend call you, they're struggling with something, they tell you about something that they're feeling bad about, maybe a mistake that they've made. Maybe your friend is like ruminating on this topic, thinking about it over and over. This is so horrible. I really screwed up. I'm so embarrassed, whatever it was that happened. And they're calling you as a friend and they're telling you these things. How do you respond to your friend? Write down what you would typically say, what you would do, and even what tone you would take with your friend that's calling for support. So let's just take a minute and do that. And we've all been there, right? You've been the support and you've also been the person that's called, right? We've all been there, absolutely. So now I want you to think about times where maybe you felt bad about something that you've done, something that you struggle with or that you're currently struggling with. And, like, how do you respond to yourself in those situations? Maybe you get stressed out, it's the holiday season, everybody can sometimes be on edge during this time. How do you respond to yourself when you've made a mistake? What would you say? What tone do you take with yourself? Just kind of note down, like, what do you do when you're in a moment of struggle? And we'll take a moment to document that. Now, I want you to start to think about the difference between the way you respond to your friend or the person that's calling you that's in a struggle and the way you respond to yourself. Is there a difference? Are we harder on ourselves? Do we lack that compassion with ourselves? So maybe write that down. Is there something that, what factors or fears come into play that lead you to treat yourself differently than someone else? Maybe write that down, jot that down. And then, how can we treat ourselves in a way that's compassionate? Think about responding to your friend. How can we take some of those same skills in a response to a friend and apply them to ourselves? How can we give ourselves grace? Anyone want to just share really quickly anything that you came up with there? You can unmute and share, or you can share in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, or you don't have to share at all. Completely up to you. We do have one chat that says forgiveness is helpful. Absolutely. When's the last time you've paused and you've said, in the middle of something that maybe you didn't do perfectly, you said, like, it's all right. I'm human. I make mistakes. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It's, things are going to look better in the morning. Things are going to get better. And even just to say it's okay to yourself. When's the last time you practiced self-compassion? These are all really good, like, skills and takeaways. If you've worked with a therapist, maybe you've done some CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy where you've used self-compassion or even mindfulness. But I think this is a really important component of self-care, is being able to say, like, it's okay. And we have another chat. It says no one is perfect. Think of the positive and love yourself. Absolutely. I agree with that. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Morgan, go ahead and go on to the next slide, please.
Okay, well, now we want to circle back around to that poll that we took when we asked you what you thought your level of self-care was. And we're going to ask that you take a quick self-care assessment. It'll take about 4 or 5 minutes. I'm going to see if I can put this in the chat. Dr. Ward, are you able to copy that link and put it in the chat?
1 second, I sure can.
If not, you can just type that link in and it'll take you right to the self-assessment homepage.
In the chat, coming your way right now.
Thank you.
Oh, I hope that worked.
So once it's in the chat, you should be able to just click on the link. And then, like I said, it'll take about 4 or 5 minutes. And if you wouldn't mind just typing done in the chat when you're done, so we can kind of get a feel for when you all are ready, and then we'll come back together and discuss.
And for the sake of time and to honor and respect your time and space here, in 1 minute, we'll give you about 1 more minute. We'll go ahead and stop where you're at. You can save your results on the assessment if you didn't get all the way through, and it will also email you assessment results if you would like. So we'll just give about 1 more minute. Oh, it looks like there's a few people that are finishing as we speak. So we'll let you finish that up, and then also say, like, this is a pretty honest and straightforward assessment. So I think it's interesting to see what your results are. And I've taken this one too, and I was like, okay, it was interesting to see. Excellent. We have many dones that are rolling in through the chat. Thank you so much for your participation. Dr. Morgan, go right ahead.
Yes, so if we could just take a quick second, and for anybody who would like to share, were your scores kind of what you thought, what you answered in the poll, or did you see some differences there once you actually took the assessment? Anybody want to share? Or even if you didn't get finished as you were going along answering the questions, were you answering kind of how you answered in the poll? Was it aligning there?
It looks like we have a chat that says that this person was pleasantly surprised with higher scores than expected, as they've been working in the field for 20+ years. So that's good to hear.
Yes.
We have another response that says, mine was pretty on par with what I thought. Yeah, so maybe there weren't any huge surprises.
Good. Well, that's awesome. Well, one more thing before we let you go is we want to help you get started on a self-care plan if you don't already have one. So up here on the screen, we have a review of the 5 domains of self-care. And if you could just take a minute to jot down one self-care idea from each domain that you think would be realistic for you to add in a self-care plan. And then the goal is hopefully over time, if you have more than one domain, that's great. And this is, a fluid plan that can be changed, things can be added to it to really just meet the needs wherever you're at as things change in time. So, we just hope that you keep this with you and that you reference it and that you use it. Sometimes it's easier if you have things written down. For me, I schedule self-care into my calendar. I have it on my personal calendar. I even have it in my work calendar, my Outlook calendar. So everybody knows that from this time to this time, that's my self-care time. So I know, not everybody can do that, but if you are able to, I think it's really helpful to just block that off and schedule it and make it a priority for yourself. And reach out to those support systems. Like we said, self-care isn't always just individual. A lot of times it's a community effort. So reach out to those supports and resources. And, Oklahoma DHS is doing a lot of great things and putting a lot of good supports in place. And I know there's a lot more trainings coming up and the lunch and learns that you do. It's all just really great support to help you along your journey.
The other thing I'll add is that so often people say, I don't have time for self-care. And my response is that there's no set amount of time you have to spend on self-care. If you're a busy family parent, or student, whatever you are, a professional, like I've always even just thought about, taking, 5 or 10 minutes to just kind of push away from my computer, push away from whatever's stressing me out and reconnect. I've used things like commute times to focus in on my mental health, on my self-care, on my well-being. And here's a great resource list. I actually have some of these here. It's a reflective self-care journal, and it's specifically for foster and adoptive parents. It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. There's so many great prompts. If you're into writing and journaling, which would really hit on multiple areas of the domains that we covered. There's also a great resource called Self-Compassion for Parents. That's a really good one. Joy Fixes for Weary Parents is great, like quick research-based ideas to help you kind of like overcome some stress. And then there's an app that we like called Presently, and it's available on all the app stores and all those things, and it's free and it's just really helpful.
And then feel free, if you have any questions or need anything, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is up here. We can also email it to you if you would like. We can get that from Dr. Goodwin or Ms. Cameron. So please feel free to reach out, and we would love to help you and answer any questions that you have.
Thank you guys so much for your interaction. We appreciate you.
And I did want to mention that we do have a self-care workshop that Dr. Ward and Dr. Schaefer Morgan are actually going to be putting on for us in the Ada area. And I will send that flyer in the chat. Actually, it should come as a PDF. And that is just a continuation on what we've been talking about today and putting it into practice, you know, as a parent. So you all are welcome to that. And like I said, if you would like to join us, definitely click that flyer and sign up and let us know you're coming.
And I have some of these I'll give away when you come. I don't have a ton of them, but we'll do like a door prize or something and give these out if you're interested in those.
Awesome. Dr. Ward, Dr. Morgan, I just want to thank you so much for coming and for sharing this. You've got lots of great reactions in the chat. I love the chat response. Thank you for reminding us just how important we are to ourselves. So grateful for that, and had some great tools for us to be able to take with us. So thank you guys. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone who hopped on here. Please reach out to us on the Oklahoma Adoption Competency Network at okfosters.org. okfosters.org. If you have any other ideas or questions for topics for future lunch and learns, we've got several things going on. You can see them on our events page. All right. Have a wonderful holiday.